I was halfway through lifting my fork when my phone buzzed. One glance at the screen, 4 words from my brother sitting just a few seats away, froze me in place. "Don't eat. Just trust me." Across the table, my husband's mother smiled like a queen holding court. Beside him, his ex brushed her hand over his arm like she owned it. The air felt thick. My pulse hammered in my ears. I didn't know it yet, but in the next 90 seconds, I'd discover the kind of family secret people don't survive, and I was sitting right in the middle of it. I was halfway through lifting my fork when my phone buzzed. One glance at the screen, 4 words from my younger brother, Tyler, sitting 4 seats down at the same table, froze me in place. "Don't eat. I'm serious." The rooftop penthouse's glass walls reflected the Manhattan skyline behind us, but the only thing I could focus on was the sudden, sharp knot in my stomach. Across the table, Evelyn, my mother-in-law, sat at the head like a monarch surveying her court, her pearl necklace catching the light with every slow, deliberate turn of her head. To her right, my husband, Grant, wore the same rehearsed smile he used in court, a smile that never quite reached his eyes. And then there was Serena, Grant's ex, in a crimson silk dress, sitting far too close, her manicured hand resting on his sleeve like she'd been given permission. She tilted her head, caught my gaze, and smiled in a way that said, "You're already losing." The shrimp cocktail on my plate gleamed under the chandelier. My mind flashed back to 5 minutes earlier, when Evelyn had leaned over me, her hand adjusting something on the plate with the casual confidence of someone who'd done it before. Tyler's warning wasn't random. And now, every instinct in me was screaming that this wasn't just dinner, it was the opening move in someone else's game. 3 months. That's how long it had been since I walked out of a Chicago hospital without the baby I'd been carrying for nearly a year. The complications had been brutal, weeks of bed rest, invasive tests, emergency procedures. By the end, I'd lost more than a child. I'd lost my health, my peace, and the version of myself that still believed Grant's family could ever truly accept me. When the grief was still raw, Evelyn called. "It's time we gathered as a family," she said, as if grief were something you could pack away like winter coats. And because Grant thought it would be good for appearances, I agreed. That's how I ended up here, in Evelyn's New York penthouse, surrounded by people who smiled with their mouths but not their eyes. Tyler was the only blood relative of mine in the room. He'd been quiet all evening, watching. He'd grown up faster than he should have, thanks to the same kind of cold politics I was now drowning in. If he told me not to eat, it wasn't paranoia. It was survival. Serena leaned in closer to Grant, whispering something that made him smirk. Evelyn reached for her wine, her gaze sweeping over me like she was evaluating an asset she didn't want but couldn't yet get rid of. Every polite laugh around the table rang hollow. The clink of cutlery felt rehearsed. And as I sat there, Tyler's warning burning in my pocket, I realized something chilling. This wasn't a family dinner. It was a test. And I was the only one at the table who didn't know the rules. The conversation was smooth, almost too smooth, the kind of flawless small talk you hear at charity galas, where every smile is a mask and every word is measured. Grant was telling some story about a high-profile case he'd almost taken, his voice warm enough to impress the table but empty of any real substance. Serena laughed at every line, leaning in so close her perfume bled into my space. Then my phone lit up again. Another text from Tyler. "Check your plate." My pulse kicked hard. I lowered my gaze, letting my hair fall just enough to shield my face from Evelyn's view. The shrimp cocktail looked untouched, except for one detail. The lemon wedge had been shifted, sitting slightly off-center from where the server had placed it. A thin, almost invisible smudge traced the rim of the plate, like something had been brushed across it. I glanced up just in time to see Evelyn tilt her head toward Serena, whisper something that made her smile like she'd just won a bet. Tyler's foot tapped mine under the table, a silent confirmation that I wasn't imagining this. Evelyn turned her eyes to me, her lips curling in that polite, lethal way of hers. "Madison," she said sweetly, "you really should try the shrimp. It's flown in fresh this morning." Every instinct I had screamed, "Don't." But I just smiled back, letting my hand hover over the fork, as if I were deciding whether to take the bait or set the trap myself. I let the fork touch the shrimp, twirling it gently as if weighing my appetite. Evelyn's eyes stayed fixed on me, her smile tightening the way a hunter's grip tightens on the trigger. Instead of taking a bite, I let the shrimp fall back onto the plate with a soft thud. "Maybe later," I said lightly. "I want to enjoy the wine first." I reached for my glass, tilting it just enough to hide my other hand sliding beneath the table. My thumb pressed the side button on my smartwatch, camera on, audio live. The tiny lens on the band was angled perfectly toward my plate. The conversation around me rose and fell like background music. Grant was talking about a client in Tribeca, Serena filling in little details only someone too close would know. I laughed at the right beats, just enough to keep the illusion that I was part of the rhythm. When the plates began to rotate for side dishes, I shifted mine slightly forward. My sleeve brushed the edge, and in one smooth motion, I palmed the lemon wedge and the top shrimp into a folded napkin I'd placed on my lap. It disappeared into the small zip bag inside my clutch. Tyler caught my eye and gave the tiniest nod, an unspoken good. I took a sip of wine, let my shoulders relax, and joined the table's polite chatter. No one noticed that I hadn't eaten a thing. No one noticed the camera quietly recording from my wrist. They thought the game was still theirs. But for the first time all night, I was holding a piece they didn't know existed. The dinner ended with air kisses and hollow goodbyes. Grant stayed behind to catch up with his mother, so Tyler and I shared the same elevator ride down to the street. The moment the doors closed, he turned to me, his voice low. "They've done it before, Maddie. To other women." The city noise rushed in as we stepped onto the sidewalk, but his words were louder in my head. I didn't ask him how he knew. Tyler never spoke without proof. By the time I got back to my hotel, my phone was already ringing. It was Daniel Cross, the private investigator I'd hired 3 weeks earlier when little inconsistencies in Grant's stories started stacking up. "Whatever you do," Daniel said, his voice clipped, "don't eat or drink anything that comes from that penthouse. And don't go back there alone." I gripped the phone tighter. "Why?" "Because I've been digging into Evelyn's history. There are at least 2 prior incidents, both women connected to family disputes, both with unexplained medical issues. Low-dose toxins, easy to miss in labs unless you know what to test for. And Madison." "What?" He exhaled hard. "The patterns match your situation almost exactly. The family dinners. The sudden illnesses. And both women signed over significant assets before they disappeared." The room felt colder. Outside my window, Manhattan glittered like nothing could go wrong here. But I finally understood, this wasn't just about humiliating me. It wasn't even just about Grant. It was about making sure I didn't survive long enough to stand in their way. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at the small desk in my hotel room, staring at the napkin-wrapped shrimp like it was a loaded gun. By morning, Daniel had already arranged for the sample to be tested at a private lab. "We'll know in 48 hours, he said. "In the meantime, start gathering everything you can." Quietly. So I did. I went back to Chicago the next day and slipped into the house I used to call mine. Grant was working late again, which gave me a perfect window. I moved like I was packing up leftover grief, slow, methodical, invisible. But every move had purpose. A miniature camera went inside the kitchen cabinet, angled at the countertop where Evelyn always helped with the food. Another was hidden inside a hollowed-out book on the living room shelf. The third, my favorite, was tucked behind the lace curtains in the dining room, aimed squarely at my old seat at the table. I copied emails from Grant's laptop onto an encrypted flash drive, threads between him and Serena that stretched back months, right into the weeks I was in the hospital. They joked about how much longer I'd last. I found bank transfers too, 5-figure sums wired to Serena from an account Evelyn controlled. By the time I finished, my pulse was steady. My breathing was slow. When Grant finally came home, I was sitting on the couch, a blanket over my lap, looking pale and small. I'm just, still tired, I told him, forcing a weak smile. He kissed my forehead like he was humoring a child and went upstairs without another word. Perfect. The more they believed I was fading, the less they'd see me loading the chessboard against them. 2 days later, Daniel called. The lab confirmed it, Madison. Low-dose organophosphate. Tasteless. Colorless. Lethal if given over time. My grip tightened on the phone. So it's not just paranoia. No, he said. And I think I know why they're doing it. He sent me a file. Inside was a list of names, 7 women over the last 15 years. Each one tied to high-value divorces, contested wills, or corporate power shifts. And in every case, one name appeared in the background like a watermark, Richard Bell. I recognized it instantly. Bell wasn't just Evelyn's personal attorney, he was the architect of the prenup Grant had convinced me to sign for tax purposes. The same prenup that would leave me with nothing if our marriage ended. But that wasn't the worst part. Buried in the files was something that made my skin go cold, a psychiatric evaluation in my name, dated 2 years before I even met Grant. The signature at the bottom belonged to a doctor who worked at one of Evelyn's private clinics. Daniel's voice was low. They've been building a case to paint you as emotionally unstable, long before you even walked into their lives. This isn't random. It's a system. I scrolled through more pages, falsified medical notes, bank transfers to Bell's offshore accounts, and a trail of shell companies connected to Evelyn's corporate empire. The truth clicked into place like teeth on a trap. Evelyn wasn't acting alone. She was part of a network, one that weaponized medicine, law, and reputation to erase women from their own lives. And now, I had proof I wasn't just another casualty on their list. I was the one who was going to end it. By the end of the week, I had enough to burn them down, or at least make them sweat. Daniel connected me with a journalist he trusted, a woman named Claire Redding who'd made her career dismantling the kind of polished corruption that thrived in skyscraper boardrooms. We met in a quiet booth at a cafe in Soho. I slid a black envelope across the table. Inside, copies of the psychiatric report, the prenup drafts, the bank transfers, and, most damning of all, a video from my dining room camera. It showed Evelyn in my kitchen, her manicured hands moving with surgical precision as she slipped a small vial's contents into a simmering pot of soup. She didn't even glance over her shoulder. Claire's eyes narrowed. This is gold. Once this is vetted, they won't know what hit them. I leaned in. I wanted to land hard. Public, visible, and impossible to bury. 3 days later, the article dropped. Headline, Behind the Penthouse Doors, the Silent Scheme Targeting Women for Profit. They didn't name me, but anyone who knew Evelyn, or Grant, or Serena could connect the dots. The piece linked their law firm, the clinic, and Bell's shell companies in a single, damning chain. By noon, the company's stock had fallen 18%. By 4 p.m., Evelyn's face was on every business news segment, her signature pearl necklace now a symbol of deceit. Grant called me that evening, his voice tight. What the hell is going on? Reporters are camped outside my building. If you know anything about this, you need to tell me. I cut him off. Maybe it's just the universe putting everyone where they belong. I hung up before he could respond. Because I knew this wasn't the explosion. This was just the spark. 2 days after the article went live, Claire called me again. Her voice was different this time, lower, urgent. Madison, I think we've been looking at the wrong person as the top of the pyramid. She forwarded me a scanned letter from an anonymous source. It claimed that Richard Bell wasn't the mastermind, he was just the frontman. The true architect was a man named Victor Hale. The name hit me like a punch. Hale wasn't just any billionaire, he was Evelyn's oldest investor, a real estate mogul with a philanthropic reputation so clean it gleamed. He'd donated millions to women's health initiatives, funded scholarships, and sat on the board of 3 major hospitals. And yet, buried in the documents Claire had uncovered, there he was, signing off on special transfers to Bell's shell companies. transfers that matched the exact days those psychiatric files in my name were altered. I started connecting the dots in my head: Hale's reach in the medical world, his control over hospital boards, his long-standing friendship with Evelyn. This wasn't just a family scheme, this was an empire built on eliminating obstacles, one woman at a time. Daniel confirmed my worst suspicion. Madison. Hale wired $25,000 to a private clinic in Chicago exactly 2 days before your emergency evaluation was signed. Same clinic Evelyn's doctor friend worked at. It was suddenly clear, I'd never just been the unlucky wife who married into the wrong family. I'd been handpicked. Selected for dismantling. And if they'd gone this far with me, there had to be others. That night, I sat at my desk, staring at Hale's name over and over, my pen digging into the paper until it nearly tore. Evelyn and Grant had made me their target. But Victor Hale had built the weapon. And now, I was going to turn it back on him. I didn't go to the police this time. I went bigger. Daniel arranged a discreet meeting with an FBI contact who specialized in white-collar crime. We met in a windowless conference room in a federal building where phones weren't allowed. I laid everything out: bank transfers, shell company maps, doctored medical reports, and the video of Evelyn in my kitchen. But the most valuable piece was fresh: a series of encrypted emails between Victor Hale and Richard Bell that Daniel had pulled from a compromised server. In them, Hale referred to women as pending removals and liabilities to be neutralized, discussing payouts as if he were settling invoices. The agent's face stayed unreadable, but his pen never stopped moving. When I was done, he closed the folder, slid it toward him, and said, "This is organized crime. And it's interstate. We're going to need you to keep playing along a little longer." So I did. For the next 3 weeks, I lived 2 lives. In public, I was the grieving wife, attending a few social functions Evelyn couldn't cancel without suspicion. I smiled, I listened, I even thanked Victor Hale for a generous donation at a charity gala. His handshake was warm, steady, like he'd never poisoned anyone's future in his life. In private, I funneled every scrap of new evidence to the FBI: phone calls from Serena bragging about finally getting rid of the competition, a signed memo from Hale instructing Bell to resolve the Chicago asset, and surveillance photos of Evelyn meeting Hale at a private airstrip. The breaking point came on a Thursday morning. The FBI called to say they were ready. Simultaneous warrants. Frozen accounts. Asset seizures. By noon, news helicopters swarmed Hale's Westchester estate. Evelyn was led out of her penthouse in handcuffs. Bell's law office was sealed with federal tape. And Victor Hale, Mr. Untouchable, was being escorted into an unmarked SUV by agents in dark suits. I watched it all on live TV from my hotel room, coffee in hand. The headline across the screen read, "Billionaire philanthropist indicted in multi-state conspiracy targeting women." For the first time in months, I felt my lungs fill all the way. Not because the fight was over, but because I had just snapped the spine of the beast. The morning after the arrests, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Reporters wanted statements. Old acquaintances wanted to check in. Even a few people I hadn't heard from in years suddenly remembered my number. But I stayed quiet. Silence had been my prison for months, now it was my shield. Grant tried calling 7 times in a single day. The one voicemail I listened to was thick with self-pity. "Madison, you've ruined everything. They're saying I knew. I didn't. You have to believe me. I didn't." That night, a white envelope was slipped under my hotel room door. No return address. Inside, a single sheet of paper. "You took down the figurehead. But there are still hands in the dark. Watch your back." It wasn't signed, but there was a faint watermark on the paper, an embossed crest belonging to one of Hale's offshore foundations. A reminder that empires don't crumble neatly, they fracture, leaving sharp edges. Daniel urged me to relocate until the trials were over. Claire agreed, offering to connect me with a safe house network for whistleblowers. But I was done running. I returned to Chicago, to the house I had taken back. Every room smelled different now, like fresh paint and clean air. The hidden cameras came down. The locks were changed. Evelyn's pearl necklace, the one she left behind in her rush, was sealed in an evidence bag in my desk drawer. I knew there might be more players out there, but the rules had changed. I wasn't prey anymore. And if anyone else thought they could finish what Evelyn and Hale started, they'd find out I'd already built a fortress from the ruins they left behind. The trials took months. Evelyn's empire of clinics was dismantled piece by piece. Victor Hale's assets were auctioned off to pay settlements to the women who came forward, women I'd never met, but whose stories sounded like echoes of my own. Richard Bell cut a deal, trading testimony for leniency, and in doing so, handed the FBI even more names. Grant's fall was quieter but no less final. He lost his license, his partners, his friends. Last I heard, he was living in a rented apartment far from the city, selling used cars under an assumed name. One crisp October morning, I stood in my yard in Chicago, planting the last of the tulip bulbs Tyler had sent me. The soil was cool in my hands, the air clean in my lungs. I wasn't planting for beauty alone, I was planting as a reminder. Because here's the truth I learned. Survival isn't about being the loudest in the room. It's about seeing the board, understanding the players, and moving with precision when they think you're standing still. It's about knowing that patience can be sharper than rage, and that the right evidence in the right hands can topple giants. People ask if I regret anything. I tell them I regret waiting so long to trust my instincts. That I should have acted the first time I felt that cold breath of danger on my neck. If there's one thing my story can teach, it's this. When the warning signs come, listen. Gather proof. Build your case quietly. And when the moment comes to act, do it so thoroughly that there's nothing left for them to take from you. As I pressed the last bulb into the earth, the sun slipped through the branches, catching the edges of my hair. For the first time in years, I wasn't just living without fear. I was living with purpose. And in the silence that followed, I realized the real victory wasn't in destroying them. It was in never letting them cage me again.
If this story resonated with you, leave a comment. Tell us, have you ever had to heal without an apology? And what gave you the strength to keep going anyway? Speech balloon, you never know. Your words might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. Bell like, subscribe, and share if you believe in turning pain into power. And remember, your story isn't over. It's just beginning.